I sat on a bench in the park, and a thought crossed my mind. How wonderful it would be if I were still 18. Back then, I was the school's undisputed beauty queen. Looking back now, that glow on my face, those eyes that used to speak, they should never have disappeared so soon. A message to high school girls everywhere. If we told you that the glow in your skin, the light in your eyes, and the vibrant energy in your body could actually last far, far longer, that your youth, those golden years from 16 to 32, could be extended 2 to 3 times longer. This is alien-level biotech, can you believe it? Maybe your youth was never meant to end. Would you think it's too much? Too dreamy? Too good to be true? But maybe it's not.
You know that feeling, right? That sort of fleeting sense of youth. You remember the glow maybe you had on your face, those sparkling eyes from younger days. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if that youthful vibrancy, that, inner energy, could actually last much, much longer? We've been told for ages that aging is mostly, genetics, or maybe finding the perfect skincare routine, maybe even cosmetic procedures. Yeah. But what if all of that is actually missing a much deeper story, a more fundamental one?
That's exactly the idea we're digging into today. This is really stepping away from the usual beauty counter chat or, product reviews. Instead, our sources introduce something they actually call a youth awakening writing. And they don't just mean like a book. They see it as this big framework aimed at women globally, really, with a pretty ambitious goal: shattering illusions, dismantling misinformation, and rebuilding a logical framework and living conditions for preserving youth. So it's a totally different way of looking at the whole aging thing.
Okay, and when we start to unpack this, our sources seem to lay out these 3 core messages. And they feel, pretty surprising, actually. First, they argue youth isn't mainly about your genes or how fancy your skincare is. Instead, they claim it's a direct reflection of the body's internal toxin concentration. Second, they suggest the body's real aging point isn't just turning 30 or 40 on a calendar, but hitting what they call the toxin saturation point. And finally, they state that only a toxin-free, oxygen-rich, deeply restorative air environment can genuinely, extend youth.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is how potentially groundbreaking they believe this perspective is. Our sources actually put forward what they're calling the first new formula of the post-cosmetics era. And it's quite stark, really. It's toxin load equals aging progress equals facial decline. Just like that. So this isn't just a minor tweak in thinking. They believe it fundamentally redefines youth as an internal environmental thing, moving way beyond what they see as just superficial external fixes. If this idea really catches on, it suggests it could completely shake up the anti-aging industry as we know it, turn it all on its head, basically.
Right. And that's really our mission in this deep dive, then, to explore these pretty surprising insights, try to understand the logic, as they call it, behind preserving youth, and figure out what our sources are pinpointing as the single most critical factor. Okay, let's really get into this piece by piece. So we just laid out this really bold claim from our sources. Youth isn't about genes or skincare, but about the body's internal toxin concentration. Now that sounds, it sounds counterintuitive to almost everything we've been taught, right? Can you elaborate a bit? What exactly do our sources mean by internal toxin concentration? Are we talking general pollutants we eat or breathe, or is it something more specific?
That's a really important question, yeah. Crucial for getting their viewpoint. When these sources talk about internal toxin concentration, they're not really talking broadly about all pollutants everywhere. Instead, they're quite specific. They define these toxins as metabolic byproducts, basically, the waste generated from our own body's normal cellular processes. They claim it's the buildup, the accumulation of these specific internal leftovers that actively gets in the way of the body's natural repair work at the cellular level. And that, they say, leads directly to the signs of aging we see and feel. So it really shifts the focus away from external dangers to, internal housekeeping, you could say.
Okay, so if it's about these internal metabolic byproducts, does that mean that focusing just on external stuff like creams or, procedures is kind of missing the point for real foundational youth preservation? What does this imply for how we usually approach anti-aging?
Precisely. That's the core argument coming from these sources. If the root cause of aging is this internal buildup, then external treatments, They might make things look better temporarily cosmetically,
Okay.
but they don't fix the underlying issue. It's like, they suggest we've been trying to repaint a house when the foundations are crumbling. This view implies a really direct link, almost mathematical, between how much of these internal toxins you have and how fast you visibly age. A link they believe is way more significant than we've realized.
That leads perfectly into their second big message then. The body's true aging point isn't the calendar, but what they call the toxin saturation point. That idea, toxin saturation point, is really interesting. How do they define that critical threshold? Is it something measurable or just kind of a concept?
Well, the toxin saturation point is where it gets really specific, because for them, it's not just a vague idea. Our sources describe it as the actual point, the threshold, where the body's natural ability to clear out these metabolic toxins and repair itself just gets overwhelmed. Think of a sponge. It can only soak up so much water, right? Once it's saturated, that's it. It can't take any more. And in the body's case, they're saying once it hits this point, it can't effectively clear waste or fully repair damage anymore. They propose that this point, rather than your 30th or 40th birthday, is when accelerated cellular decline and, visible aging really kick in. So it redefines aging not as just time passing, but as this dynamic internal struggle against accumulation.
Okay, so those visible signs we associate with getting older, wrinkles, maybe dull skin, losing elasticity, our sources are suggesting those are actually direct, visible signals that we've hit this internal saturation point. Not just, oh, I'm another year older. It's like our body's giving us a status report, almost.
Exactly. That's precisely how they frame it. For these sources, those external signs aren't just inevitable results of time passing. They're symptoms. Symptoms of an internal environment that's reached its limit for detoxification and repair. They claim that by focusing on this toxin saturation point, instead of just age, we get a more actionable way to understand and maybe even influence our own aging process. It implies the direct, almost mathematical correlation we mentioned, which they claim is far more important than we've previously thought.
Right. So if internal toxins in reaching this saturation point are the core problems, what's the solution our sources are putting forward to genuinely extend youth? They mention a toxin-free, oxygen-rich, deeply restorative air environment. Now, that sounds like more than just, getting some fresh air outside. What exactly do they mean by this specific kind of environment?
Yeah, this is where their proposed solution really takes shape. And you're right, it's more specific than just clean air.
Yeah.
When they talk about a toxin-free, oxygen-rich, deeply restorative air environment, they actually go into details about how certain airborne elements and optimized oxygen levels can interact right down at the cellular level. The idea is to create an internal atmosphere that actively helps cells metabolize efficiently, boosts the pathways that remove waste, and speeds up the body's own repair systems. Think of it like creating the perfect internal microclimate where your cells can really thrive, detoxify properly, and rejuvenate themselves, almost like an internal purification system driven by the air itself.
So this isn't just about general air quality we might measure outside, but a very specific, maybe even controlled environment designed to optimize how the body works internally. It sounds like they're suggesting this is the single most important thing we can influence.
That really is their central argument, their thesis, you could say. Our sources claim that this specific type of air environment is the only truly effective way to stop those internal metabolic toxins from building up and prevent us from hitting that toxin saturation point. They argue that while, sure, other things might play a part, creating this optimal internal environment through the air we breathe is the fundamental key. The key to enabling the body's sustained youthfulness and its ability to repair itself. It's really about making sure the body has the absolute ideal conditions to clean house and fix things from the inside out.
Okay, so as we sort of wrap up this deep dive, it's really clear we've explored a pretty profound shift in perspective. The idea that youth isn't just about the calendar, about chronological age, but as our sources argue, it's a direct reflection of our internal environment. Specifically, it comes down to the concentration of those metabolic toxins inside us and hitting that critical toxin saturation point we talked about. And it's important, like they clarified, the goal isn't really getting younger in some magical way. It's more about staying in a youthful state longer, more stably, and aging slower by managing this internal load.
Exactly. If we bring this back to you, the listener, while we might not have total control over our external world like general pollution or the air quality outside our window, our sources really emphasize that we can choose our breathing rights. That's the term they use. They propose we actually have the power, the agency, to actively create a pure breathing living space, or even an air sanctuary for ourselves. And this choice, they claim, it goes way beyond just looking good superficially. It's really about enabling the body's fundamental capacity to repair itself, to self-regulate. And ultimately, they connect it to maintaining our dignity and choice and how we actually experience life and our health over time.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to chew on. If the definition of youth really does shift away from just a number, your age, to a metric more like, say, toxin concentration multiplied by repairability, what does that actually mean for how we live day to day? How might this youth revolution, which our sources suggest is accessible to everyone simply by influencing the air they breathe, how could that fundamentally reshape our understanding of health, longevity, and even the simple everyday choices we make about the very air we inhale?